It's good to be here, and Fabio assigned this title to my talk, Animal Welfare and Society Concerns, Finding the Missing Link, and he had many, many different things he wanted me to talk about. So I'm going to be talking about some farm issues too. You know, today a lot of young people want to connect with their food, but they just don't have any idea where their food comes from. And one of the things they want is a personal connection. One thing I really liked in your meat is the consumer can track it back to the individual farmer. They're really interested in meeting the person that raised their food for them. Now, let's look at what's driven change. At least in my country, one of the big drivers of change has been retailers. Back in 1999, I worked with McDonald's on implementing animal welfare auditing at slaughterhouses using a very simple objective scoring system that's outlined in a paper I did for the 2010 Icomst meeting. Real simple scoring. What percentage of cattle did you stun on the first shot? How many cattle were bellowing and vocalizing in the stun box? Very, very simple measurements. Now, I had an interesting discussion out at the poster session just the other day, and somebody asked me, how can I convert animal welfare to a single score in an auditing system? And I said, that's going to be very, very difficult to do. But let's look at the things that we absolutely should not do. And if we use a traffic rules analogy, things that would be equivalent to drunk driving and animal welfare. Stuff we just do not do. And there's videos out on the internet of really bad things that we shouldn't do, like beating up animals, starving animals. And I think in the future, one of the big issues that we're going to have is what I call biological overload. I'm going to be discussing that later. We select animals for performance, and then you end up with bad leg problems in chickens. And I'm going to be getting into that issue further. Here's examples of bad treatment that just should not be happening. Somebody's beating dairy cows with a cane. They put so many cattle on a truck they can barely get the door shut. And then you're going to have animals go down and get trampled. Neglected health problems. Things like maybe a rotten prolapse that's allowed to just rot off. Rough handling. Another issue that needs to be fixed in the slaughter plants, and I'm going to be talking more about kosher slaughter, is how the animal is restrained. Dragging it around on the floor, no. That needs to stop. We need to look at what we do and say to yourself, if somebody takes their phone, you got to remember, there's pressure that makes change. And you got your phone here. Yeah, it does work. And it is off. They can go around the plants, take pictures of things. If it would look bad on the internet, don't do it. You've got a beautiful brand here in Uruguay, doing some really terrible kosher slaughter, dragging cattle around on the floor, is not something you want associated with Uruguayan beef. Now, if you'd like to see center track restrainer system I designed, you can look at Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. Now, that system is a bit too large for a lot of these plants. I went to a plant yesterday. They were using an electric stun box, and it was working really, really well. Okay, good management. One thing I've learned in all the years I've worked on this stuff, people want a magic thing. Okay, we're going to buy a robot to solve all our problems. They want that more than they want paying attention to details of procedure. Like Paranhos da Costa in Brazil found, training employees reduces bruising. You see, that's the management side of things. How about incentive programs? One thing that's being used in America is video auditing. There's video cameras in the plant, but they are looked at by an outside auditing agency that uses objective scoring. It needs to be looked at by an outside agency. Also, you must not overwork and understaff jobs where people get so tired they can't do them. There's a lot of things that we can fix that'll be easy. And then there's other things that are going to require some changes in procedure. Of course, out on the farm, the big issue is sow gestation stalls, where the pregnant sow lives in a stall where she cannot turn around for most of her life. We're going to have to be doing more on pain relief during painful procedures, and then religious slaughter. All right, let's look at some examples of what I call biological system overload. Look at keel bone fractures in old laying hens. High percentages of old laying hens have broken bones because when they make the eggs, they take all the minerals out of the bones. We've had some problems at home with too much beta agonists and getting cattle that had difficulty walking and sore feet. I'm concerned about some animals losing parasite and disease resistance. Never over-select for a single trait. Something bad will happen. Never select for a single trait. What's the optimal amount of gain? Not the maximum. What is the optimal? Foot and leg problems. Liver abscesses when you feed too much grain. We've got to get more, looking at optimum, not maximums. Now, I've been seeing in some of the beef cattle at home problems with bad legs, either too straight, too slanted, and then you have bulls that have a hard time walking. We call it lameness, difficulty walking, sore feet. Some people say we can just use genomics and we do not have to, do visual appraisal of animals. I think visual appraisal will help keep you out of trouble, especially for something like leg problems. Yes, there are some high marbling, really wonderful meat quality bulls, and they have horrible legs, horrible. Traits are linked. There's a pig with terrible legs. Well, I think it'd be a bad idea for the beef industry to make the same mistake on feet and legs that the pig industry made. Not good. These pigs have difficulty walking. And there's an abnormality of the foot. Started showing up around 2010. Be careful. Traits are linked. And here's a Holstein steer doing tongue rolling. There's a genetic factor in some of these abnormal behaviors. When you breed an animal to grow, to make production, make milk, make eggs, you also breed for food-getting behaviors. Feather pecking in hens, some of the new research is showing that the chicken may actually be trying to forage in the other bird's feathers with disastrous results. We have to look at what's optimal, not maximum. Remember, there's always trade-offs. There's a tendency for people to say, oh, genomics now. We're going to make everything wonderful. Just remember, it's a power tool. And power tools are good things, but a circular saw can cut my hand off a lot faster than a hand saw. So you need to be careful with power tools. This is a slide I was given a long time ago when I first started. And I used to look at this slide as a complete joke. But what I think in the future is going to get to be a bigger and bigger problem is pushing animals for production past their biological limits. And then I had a student ask me if this was real. No, it is a painting, fortunately. Now, what are some examples of simple things we could do at a meat plant to improve handling? I've got to talk about just some of my regular stuff I've been working on. Changes in lighting can make a big difference. Animals do not like going into the dark, taking out distractions, non-slip flooring, scheduling arrival of trucks, so you do not have trucks lined up and waiting. Get down and see what your animal's seeing. You see how this animal is walking there and you can see little sun stripes? Well, something like that could make the animal refuse to go in the plant. In this pig race, it's got a very bad reflection on the floor, sparkly. And to get rid of this reflection and greatly improve the pig handling, I just moved the lights on the ceiling, moved the lights over about 1 meter, and the reflection went away. Move small groups of pigs and cattle. I went to a plant yesterday. They were doing a beautiful job moving small groups. Good handling will require more walking. You'll also see here that the alleyway has space in it. This principle applies to big plants. It also applies to small plants. Now, the way this system is laid out, As the cattle come around that round crowd pen, then they're going back to where they come from. Cattle on pegs always want to go back to where they come from. It's true for sheep, too. Here's an animal walking up to the entrance of the race, and it stopped. And it can see out through the fence and see welding equipment, people walking in and out of the maintenance shop. And I added a solid side, and then the cattle no longer saw people walking in and out of the maintenance shop. That was an example of a simple change. In fact, I'd recommend that you experiment maybe with plywood or cardboard to see exactly where you need to have the solid side. I go into plants, portable lights, some cardboard, do a lot of experimentation to see where I need to change something. Okay, this man is holding this electric goad. An electric goad must never be your primary driving aid. Get it out of your hands. I went to the plant yesterday. At the entrance of the stun box, they had a hook for the electric goad. It's there when you need it, but the flag is the thing that you carry all the time. And you only pick up the electric goad when the animal refuses to go in the stun box. Everywhere else, there should be no electric goads. Here's just an example of a light to light up an entrance. You can experiment with lighting. You see, and it's lighting up the way in front of that animal. Okay, you keep score on things. Right now, our plants are probably shooting 97, 98% of the cattle, single shot effectively with a captive bolt. You manage things you measure. So you measure what percentage of cattle or pegs or shape did you render insensible with a single shot. You measure that. You measure things like how many animals vocalized and bellowed in the stun box. Now, cattle standing in line will talk to their friends in the yard. You don't count that. In the stun box, it counts. I'm keeping the water over there so it doesn't spill on the electronics. It's very important to have separation of water and electronics. Okay, now we're going to talk about a big controversial issue, religious slaughter. And you have two issues here. Does cutting the throat without stunning, does that cause pain? And the other issue is, how do I hold and restrain that animal? And one of the biggest problems is restraint. You know, put a chain on the leg, drag it around on the floor, and you have 5 people standing on top of it. That has to stop. Absolutely has to stop. You know, there's certain things in animal welfare we must not do. You know, just like in driving, we do not drive drunk, and we do not deliberately hit other cars. Those are things that we do not do. Well, there's things in animal welfare that we just must not do. This is something that needs to be changed, is holding the animal in a really nasty manner. Well, and that's how plants, some of them hang live cattle up. That's like totally atrocious. Vocalization score will be about 100%. Now, some Muslim religious authorities will accept pre-slaughter stunning, especially Jarvis electric stun box, head only, because that's fully reversible, or on shape, it would be a head only stun that's reversible, non-penetrating captive bolt, and the heart does still beat after captive bolt, even penetrating captive bolt for a while. Now, things like shackling and hoisting and dragging animals around, OIE says no, do not do this. European legislation, Canadian legislation does not allow this. The American voluntary standard does not allow this, and most of the restaurant chains are not, and grocery stores that have an animal welfare auditing program do not allow that. Now let's look at some of the research. I've done a lot of research on using vocalization scoring. And if you have a problem inside your cattle stun box, and you've got a lot of cattle mooing, they could be mooing due to excessive pressure, they could be mooing because the stun missed, maybe you just left them in there too long. And you want to have, you know, if you have a head holder, no more than 5% of the animals vocalizing in the stun box. It's very simple to score it.
You score each animal, yes, no. Was he silent, quiet, or did he go, Did he vocalize, or was he silent? Now, I was very happy yesterday. I heard no vocalization in the stun box. Now, there were some cattle in the lairage talking. You do not score that. Plants that have very severe problems may have 25 to 35% of the cattle vocalizing. I have found that in my research, and Bourquet in France found the same thing. You know, problems such as excessive pressure from the restraining device, sharp edges that stick into them. And vocalization in cattle and pigs is associated with physiological measures of stress. And it's also associated with bad handling, electric goads, poking animals with electric goads, slamming doors on them, squeezing them too hard. Okay, this shows a really nice upright restraint device for a religious slaughter. The animal is in a standing position. You know, these systems are relatively inexpensive to build. You know, there are some people that want them rolled over onto their back. That's much more stressful for the animal. It's also a lot more expensive to build. Now you'll notice that I've got a light right up here, so that as this animal walks in, he sees a lighted space. It's very, very important to have a barrier here. You've got to make sure that your animal does not look out onto the floor. I've seen too many restraining devices where the animal walks in, he's got a full view of all the people and activity on the slaughter floor. Well, that just is bad. You know, you need to get that fixed. Let's look at some of the research. In 1994, I was working on installing upright restraint devices, tearing out really bad shackle hoist systems. And does the throat cut hurt? Now, this is kosher, where they use the special big, long knife. And for cattle, full-sized cattle, that knife's important. Short knives gouge the throat. And I found if I held the animal really quietly, brought in quietly, that when you had a really good rabbi, and it does make a difference how good the rabbi is, there was less reaction to the throat cut than if I went like this in the cattle's face. Then Gibson, in 2009, found that cutting calf with a knife that may have been too short caused some severe pain. Neville Gregory, looked into the issue of aspiration of blood, not nice, blood going down the windpipe. And he also suggested that if you change the position of the cut, you may cut sensory nerves that are associated with the aspiration. You know, to maintain an acceptable level of animal welfare, if you're not stunning, requires very detailed attention to exactly how you do it. Details of procedure are important. I find in management, people are always looking for the magic thing. Oh, let's put in a robot to pack the meat in the boxes. I'm going, no. I'm going to figure out how to pack the meat in the boxes so the boxes are straight and they're not bent. I don't think I need a robot for that. You know, things like kosher slaughter require attention to detail, just like skinning out a back leg requires attention to detail to avoid contamination. And if you've got to pay really close attention to detail, I think you can get the welfare to an acceptable level if you're holding the animal in an upright restraint device. Here are some tips. Calm animals will lose sensibility faster. The way the rabbi does the knife stroke makes a difference. Also, you put the animal in the box, cut it immediately. Don't let it stand there going, it's fighting the head holder. You spend 5 minutes washing it, the cattle's going to get all upset. Vocalization score, 5% or less. And if you're going to be, that big knife really is important. Also, as soon as the cut's made, release pressure on the body. Don't be squeezing the animal too hard. It's details of procedure. And I've run kosher boxes, and when it's done really right, I'm going, well, he didn't seem to act like he felt it. But if you get sloppy, it's going to get bad really quickly. If you have good procedure, the collapse time will be shorter.
In other words, the amount of time required for the animal to collapse, lose the ability to stand. So what are some of the things I would measure for religious slaughter? Vocalization score needs to be 5% or less of the cattle. In other words, 95% quiet cattle. Electric goad score, really low, around 5%. And if you're doing really good technique, over 90% of the cattle will collapse within 30 seconds. I can measure that. What is my collapse time? You manage things you measure, and then you can get better and better and better. And there's a difference between good technique and sloppy technique. There's also differences in anatomy of your animals. Sheep lose sensibility faster. Has to do with the anatomy. All the vessels are in the front of the sheep's neck. Cattle have some vertebral arteries going up the back of their neck, and cattle are going to take longer to lose sensibility than sheep will. And this is based on the Baldwin and Bell's old paper. They totally dissected out all the blood vessels, and there's a difference in the anatomy. Okay, what are some of the welfare issues that we've got at the farm that can make good animal welfare at the slaughterhouse really difficult? One of the worst ones is old, weak, emaciated dairy cows and beef cattle. In other words, the animal has been allowed to deteriorate until she's almost half dead before you sell it. You know, you have to have an animal at the plant that I can handle. And I'm seeing more and more where I'm going to have to go back in the supply chain, back to the farm, to solve a problem that I have at the plant. Cattle that are completely wild. You see, an animal differentiates between a man on a horse and a man on the ground. And some of the most dangerous cattle to handle at a slaughterhouse are cattle that have never seen a walking person until they get to a plant. They need to learn how to go in and out of pens with people before they go to plants and feed yards. We've had problems with lameness, which is sore feet and difficulty walking, with cattle fed high doses of beta agonists in the summertime, in the hot weather. Then you've got the old porcine stress syndrome in pigs. In America, many people have eliminated that, but I was in Germany just this summer, and they brought these pigs in on the most beautiful truck you ever saw. And there was a PSS pig, a Piet train, spotted. I'm going, we're still breeding this. I can put this animal in a Rolls Royce, and it's still going to have terrible welfare. This truck was the best truck you ever saw, with all the decks that went up and down. It's a very expensive truck. But I have to have, or lorry, I guess as you call it here, I have to have an animal that's fit for transport to put on that truck. And then problems with the sore feet due to leg conformation issues. Okay, what are things we need to look at out on the farm? Okay, there's a lot of research being done now on like positive emotions and things like that in animals. But the first thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure we're not doing the equivalent of drunk driving and animal welfare. Okay, bruises. There's been a lot of research that's shown that you start working on handling, you can cut bruises in half. And animals can bruise even after stunning until they've been bled. You've got to get rid of the blood pressure. So if you slam the stun box door on the animal's back, it will bruise it. In fact, Carmen Gallo's group's done work with that and found that stun box door was a major cause of bruising. And you need to have your controls designed so that when I push the lever to stop the door, it stops. It doesn't keep going down for this far before it stops. Body condition. Do I have real skinny animals with the ribs showing? Problems with they have difficulty walking. Neglected health problems. Maybe a cancer eye that's burst and all the black stuff is coming down. We're starting to get feedlots in this country. We need to be keeping cattle clean and controlling mud in feed yards. How many dirty cattle have I got? Well, I've been to Europe, and
I'm not going to name any countries, but there's one country where the cattle are beautiful and spotless. There's another country in Western Europe where some of the dirtiest, filthiest, most disgusting cattle I've ever seen came from. And I think it's interesting that they have some of the highest micro counts in Europe, and we will not say their name. Liver abscesses from feeding too much grain, lung lesions from sickness, and in chickens, eye damage due to high ammonia. Beef cattle welfare. What are the biggest issues? In feed yards, heat stress. Angus cattle, black cattle, they get hotter. Muddy pens. That's a big welfare issue for feedlot cattle. Handling. I think handling is one area where people around the world are getting a lot better. Beta agonists, got to be very, very careful in the summertime with zolpanerol and ractopamine because you can get lameness, which is sore feet, and stiff muscles, and increased death losses, and liver abscesses from too much grain. Here is heat-stressed cattle. You've got open mouth breathing when they're at rest. Open mouth breathing is not acceptable. I like simple things to measure. And these animals are in severe heat stress. Terry Mader has very nice papers in the journal Animal Science on this. This is not acceptable. And I've had some people say to me, oh, well, they're just panting like a dog. No. Cattle, this is severe heat stress. We have to make sure we do not let bad become normal. You know, right now in the dairy cattle, we have about 25% sore feet and lameness. That's bad becoming normal. People get used to seeing that. This is some data that my student, Ruth Woolywody, collected at 28 feed yards, Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado, measurements on cattle handling. Animal handling is something that we need to measure. What is the percentage of animals, pigs or cattle, that you moved with electric goads? Sheep, we should not be using them. How many animals vocalized when I caught them in the squeeze chute? Obviously, if I brand cattle, they're going to vocalize. But I should be able to catch their head and catch their body. She only had about 1% of them vocalizing. Falling down when they come out. You've got to make sure you have a non-slip floor. She's got under 1%. Stumbling, fall on their knees, at about 7%. Miscaught, that's where you catch them in the squeeze chute around the middle. That's at about 2%. And then, of course, you want to reduce the amount of animals that go running wildly out of the chute. And there's going to be a paper later on this afternoon on cattle that run fast and their weight gain. And I did some of the very earliest research on cattle temperament, and I found wild cattle gain less weight. Well, you're going to find out this afternoon that wild cattle gained more weight. And I think the reason for that is maybe it's bunk space, and those tame animals don't go up there and get the feed. Yeah, I want to get rid of wild cattle. But we need to be selecting for optimal. You do not want to turn beef cattle into Holstein dairy cows that do not care about their calves. It's optimal, not maximum. Okay, dairy issues. Number one problem in dairy cattle today is the lameness. Now, in the countries of the world that have the grass-based dairies, this is less of a problem. But in the more intensive dairies, it's 24% have sore feet and sore legs. Somebody asked me what lameness was, so I'm explaining to you what lameness is. And that 24% figure was here 10 years ago. It is still here now. This is atrocious. Cattle that produce high amounts of milk have less body condition. In other words, she's putting all her energy into the milk, and nothing is left of the cow. Now, there's a point where it's gone too far. Swollen hocks, that's their legs. And there's a big difference between well-managed and poorly managed dairies when they use cubicles. And then the foot pads in their feet got thinner fat. I think we're pushing this dairy cow, especially the not the grass-fed type, but more the American type of Holstein, to the point where it's biologically on edge. And we don't want to be repeating the mistakes the chicken industry made. I'm going to get into that later. And I think poultry should be in Icomst. Okay, pigs. This is the controversial one. I think it's interesting that the two species that the OIE does not have welfare guidelines for are pigs and laying hens. And I think the reason for that is because you have very controversial, contentious issues concerning housing, where with the other species you don't have these issues. And the big issue for the pigs is gestation stalls, where a sow lives most of her life in a stall where she cannot turn around. And 2/3 of the US public say that's not acceptable. I did a little informal survey on the airlines, and I showed people pictures of sow stalls. And I had one man, he had hunting dogs, and he goes, "I wouldn't put my dogs in that thing." Now, what would be the best alternative system, group housing system? Let's let the industry innovate. See, my approach to animal welfare is say, okay, no gestation stalls. Let's get rid of gestation stalls. But let's the industry be innovative. I don't want to get too prescriptive on the exact group housing system that should replace it. There's a tendency to get so prescriptive that you block innovation. Well, I design equipment, so I don't want to block innovation. And I've seen really innovative things just in my part of the plant. I've seen some very nice, simple head holder designs for captive bolt stunning. Some very, very good ones I saw in Europe. Very simple. I saw one this summer in China that was very nice, very simple. Came up with some ideas I hadn't thought of. That's innovation. I do not want to block that. Just to show you what gestation stalls look like. There's two issues. You have the gestation stall where the sow is in there for her pregnancy. And then you have the farrowing stall where the sow has her babies. They are two separate issues. Okay, a farrowing stall can help, prevent smashing of the piglets. Now you've got one animal in there, the smaller one, where the stall is the correct size for your animal. And then you got that other big mama there. That's what I call an overstuffed stall. And that's absolutely not acceptable. Okay, let's look at some of our alternatives. You can go with electronic feeding stations. And this is a system which will require computer skills. If you like computers, this would be a good system. If you hate computers, it would not be a good system. Another thing that we got to look at in making group housing work is genetics. There are some pigs that are vicious on fighting. See, the problem is, if you have pigs living in boxes, they cannot fight. So nobody was getting rid of the really nasty girls. And there are some lines of pigs that are vicious. I can remember when these pigs came in the 80s, and the tail biting went up and up and up. There are some pigs that just will not work in group housing systems. They got really nasty genetics because there was a mistake made. Traits are linked. These aggressive pigs and the weight gain were linked. Nobody deliberately breeds a nasty, mean pig. That was an accident, but it happened. Okay, here's another system. This is free choice stalls. In other words, you have like gestation stalls that they can go into if they want to. And this is a very expensive system. This is probably the most expensive system when it comes to steel work. This one's fairly cheap from a steel fabrication standpoint. And this one's expensive. That's one of the downsides of that. There's trade-offs. And then you can also just have small pens. And you'll notice that you still have the old feeders from the gestation stalls. Those feeders cost a lot of money. Probably do not want to throw those feeders away. And I can make small pens with some shoulder dividers, and I can keep my expensive feeders. And there's going to be other things thought up. These are just some of the things that people are using. Murphy Brown is one of our big companies that's made a commitment to getting rid of gestation stalls, and they kind of like this system. Okay, what are other things we could do for the pigs? Eliminate castration. I don't really want to look at screeching baby piglets, being castrated on the internet.
Well, you can use this vaccine that immunizes them against the male hormone. Also, some people in America have worked on a little box that has anesthetic in it to anesthetize the babies. They can work very well. Maybe we can genetically eliminate boar taint. Another controversial area is blunt force trauma for euthanizing baby piglets. You know, take them by the back of the legs, slam them on the floor. Looks really terrible on TV. It is effective. This is where science and the public are going to part ways here. We're going to have to find a better way than slamming piglets on the floor to put down baby piglets. Laying hens. Housing issue is a big issue. You know, cages versus free-range housing. There are genetic differences in how much hens peck each other. It's foraging behavior gone crazy. But here's the shocker. Even if you put hens up in really good housing, we house them in really good housing, keel bone fractures, 36 to 80% have broken bones at the end of lay. These hens have extreme osteoporosis. This is an example of biological overload at its worst. You know, when I first started in the industry, handling. Everything was all about handling. Yes, and handling's improved, and I'm really, really happy about that. And handling is super important. But you're talking about pain here from broken bones. I think in the future, biological overload is going to be one of our biggest issues. Okay, there's a battery cage stocked correctly. Now you notice the hen cannot stand up at full posture. You know how pigeons walk like this? Well, hens do the same thing. She's got the live stooped over. There's a battery cage where they put so many chickens in there, they cannot lay down at night. And when they get to the end of lay, they've lost half their feathers. Okay, you can have an aviary system. Now there's trade-offs. You can get a lot of dirt and dust and stuff in this system. Or you might go with what's called a colony house, which is a cage system, but it gives the hen some things hens want. And one thing that she wants is a private nest box. You got to think about the wild hen. When hens lived in the bushes, the hen that laid her eggs in the bushes, the fox did not find her or her eggs. The hen that laid her eggs out in the clearing, the fox killed her and ate her eggs. So there's a strong instinct to hide, to lay the eggs. And you can measure this motivation in an objective way. Like, for example, how long is a hen willing to stay off a feed to get that private nest box? A long time. How about sheep biological overload? Well, you breed that animal for more productivity, then we lose parasite resistance. In fact, in my paper, which I do have on open access, I paid to have that paper put on open access, I looked up a lot of research on biological system, on disease resistance. And some of these modern hybrid pigs have less disease resistance. I've been in this industry for a long time. And I can remember when the lean type of pigs came into the industry, porcine respiratory and reproductive syndrome, boom, big disease, come out, boom. I think that disease had always been there, but is at a really low level. Then we got ileitis, then we got swine wasting, and now we have porcine epidemic diarrhea. It seems like every 7 years we got a new pig disease. And people have been fighting these by putting biohazard filters in the windows of the barn that filter out germs. Hospitals do not have that. That's something you'd use for the bubble boy. Maybe we need to be breeding some strength back in. But the thing is, energy is required. There's trade-offs. I might have to give up a little bit of production in order to put some disease resistance in. Broiler chickens, leg abnormalities caused by rapid growth. Now, I want to give the poultry industry credit for working on reducing some of this problem. And one of the ways they've done that is selecting, doing walking tests, see how well chickens walk. Okay, foot pad lesions, breast blisters, that's dirty bedding. Lots of things we can look at the slaughterhouse. Breast blisters, foot pad lesions from mucky, wet bedding, hawk burn on their legs from laying in ammonia. I won't use the swear word for the stuff they're going to lay in. And then also you need to look at catching method. When I first started working with chickens, a lot of rough handling. And we got the rough handling stopped. The broken wings went from 5 and 6% down to under 1%. That's my website. And we have got time for questions. The little countdown clock is just about ready to go off, and I'm not going to do countdown like a space shot. I did that in a meeting. It was kind of stupid. We won't do that. Maybe I will do it. 6, 4, oh, wait a minute. It went 2 seconds at a time. Maybe I'm not going to do that. Well, I just want to talk about a little idea that I have thinking about meat marketing. I love the ads you had on Take a Bite of Uruguay. That was wonderful. But you know what? You need to preserve your Hereford breed too. Why don't you make a brand called Heritage Hereford Beef, using the old genetics? When I came to Argentina over 20 years ago, every bit of meat was tender. Some of this improved genetics, I don't think it's as tender. This is one advantage of having been around for a long time. I remember that. Some of those straight-bred Herefords, they need to be your Heritage Hereford beef. And I even thought up a beautiful new box design, from the Apple School of Design, sort of, how about a brown box? It's white on one end and white on the bottom part and brown, sort of like Hereford cattle. That would make a really, really nice looking box. But you better start doing it soon before Angus take over. I think it'd be a shame to lose all those older type Hereford cattle because they're going to be tender.